your neighbors. As we suggested earlier, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. So, yes, sir.
You don't have some sample contracts on your website? I mean, we've already taken a loss. I don't know, we're going to spend more money to hire a lawyer or somebody to draw up a contract.
So, yeah, there are contracts, sample contracts on our website that are very good. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Is there cost share out there for beetles? Would we see this coming down the pipe? Particularly for light damage, we'll see beetles out there?
I don't think I can answer that question. That would be an FSA
Oh, that's right.
government answer on that. Again, call me. My name, my number is on the website. If I get overwhelmed, I will get some help and we will get your timber looked at.
Let me just thank you for allowing me to sit in and to listen to you. I've got to leave at 3:30 to go to another meeting in Macon, but I will have two members of my staff that will be here throughout the meeting, Michael Bryant and Paul Fryer. Would y'all just step in and hold up your hands so that they'll know who you are? Mr. Paul Fryer, Mr. Michael Bryant. Both of them will be here for the duration of the meeting. And if you have any questions for us, or any way we can be helpful, please funnel them to me through them. But thank you for allowing me to be here, and I promise you I'll do my dead level best to try to get us through this so that we can get back, have some relief and recovery.
Thank you, Coach.
While Devin's coming up, there was mention of pine beetles. That is a real concern with the stands that you leave. You know, if you have damage, but you decided it's not enough for salvage, or you can't salvage, and you're just going to go forward with the stand that you have left, then you do need to be vigilant regarding pine bark beetles, because we actually had a tree that had fallen on one of our offices, and the root ball was still in the ground, and it wasn't what you had a few days later.
About
About a week later, it had Ips, pine bark beetles in the tree already. So these bark beetles are going to be attracted to these stressed trees. So do be looking for that. And as far as what the Forestry Commission is going to do, I talked with our Forest Health Coordinator, and we will do some pine beetle flights coming up just to see if we can detect anything. You know, if there's any good news in this, as far as beetles go, we didn't have any real southern pine beetle activity in this area leading up to this event. So that's a good thing. So what we would expect would be the Ips pine bark beetle, which is kind of an opportunistic bark beetle that comes in after damage and after stress events. And it can attack those stressed trees and then move into some of the more healthy trees, but it usually stays within small areas. It doesn't attack that many trees. So that's the norm for that beetle. So just be on the lookout for those pine bark beetles. Yes, sir.
What do you suggest that we do if we're going to leave salvageable timber out there to prevent these beetles? What can we possibly do to address some of it?
Yeah, so the question was, what can we do to prevent pine beetles if we're going to leave these stands out there? You know, large scale, there's not a lot you can do. Now, you can get out there and you can make a difference in a small spot. If you've got a tree leaning, you know, trees leaning into other trees, you can try to put them on the ground, but, you know, you may be in the hospital. If you do that yourself, you know, you may not be worried about beetles when you lay in the hospital, but you know, it's a dangerous thing. But, you know, if you can get the trees on the ground, that's the best thing. And then there's really nothing you can do other than just be vigilant. Go to your stands, you know, open up your roads where you can get through there and look at them. You know, that's just something you need to do, is just As you go through these stands this fall and winter, if you're out hunting or whatever you're doing out there, just get in the habit of looking up at the tops of the trees. And when you see those tree tops start turning yellow or they just don't look like they're a good green color, then take a closer look. And if you see any pitch tubes on the tree, the Forestry Commission can come out and help you determine if you do have a beetle problem or not.
Scott, part of the question there is what next? I mean, if the landowner finds they've got beetles, I'm asking you the question.
Okay. Can y'all hear him?
The question
Yes,
is,
sir.
if you find beetles, as we're talking about, what next? I think that's what you need to know as landowners.
Yeah, what next if you do find beetles? There are some sprays that are labeled for pine bark beetles, but it's not practical in a forested situation because you got to spray the whole tree. It's pretty much a cut and try to remove the infested area plus some of the uninfested, except in the case where it's Ips. So that's important to try to determine what kind of beetle it is. If it's Ips pine bark beetle, it may only kill a few trees and then it quits. But if it's southern pine beetle, it may move through the whole area. And the good thing, or one good thing we're facing, is we are going into the fall and the winter, so we would expect beetle activity to be less. But if we go into a mild winter and we keep temperatures in the 60s, then you can expect to see, possibility of pine bark beetles. So, if you catch it early, one thing you can do if you find infested trees is you can cut the tree down. Just cut it and leave it, because we know we're facing a challenge in salvage market anyway. So now I'm telling you to salvage a little small beetle spot. It's probably not going to happen. So you can sever that tree from the stump, fall it, leave the top on it, and the top will suck the water, the moisture out of that tree. Creates an environment in the tree that's not conducive for those beetles to continue to develop and reproduce, which is kind of how they move and grow. They build up huge populations, so you can cut the infested trees down, leave the tops on them, and that could prevent it from spreading throughout the rest of the stand. So just be looking for that. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
I'm new to all of this, so am I hearing it right that we've got trees down, we can't salvage them, those trees are going to call in pine beetles, which are going to take more trees, and we're back to where we started?
Everybody hear that? Yep. Well, you did describe the worst case scenario, but that is a worst case scenario. So again, we're shooting straight. With the beetle thing is just, it's not saying that just because you've got trees down and the trees you leave, you're going to have pine bark beetles come in and kill the rest of them. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying that be aware that could be an issue, and just be on the lookout for that.
But we can't burn what's already down, because if we did, we'd then be involving the cotton crops and all the crops that are laying in the fields. They're going to catch fire even with fire breaks. If we take a chance on trying to burn what's down, aren't we going to destroy more than just our property?
Well, yeah, the question was about burning. The burning at this point really isn't going to help a whole lot. I mean, it's not going to help a whole lot from a beetle standpoint, but you may even exacerbate the problem if you burn and you stress that tree even more when those big brush piles catch fire and they scorch half the needles off the tree.
I haven't got enough to save. I'm just trying to find some land to plant some new stuff on that I'm going to have to pay for to get planted after I've already lost all the rest.
Yes, ma'am. We're going to talk a little bit later about, we'll have an FSA person here talking about cost share opportunities for planting. So, yes, sir.
Going forward, it seems a lot of what we're talking about here is more reactive to what has happened forward instead of being more proactive going forward. With Georgia being pretty much the timber basket of the country in the South.
Yes, sir.
What can we learn from our distant cousins in the ag business when it comes to could GFC look at possibly looking at the probability of being able to do some sort of insurance program for the timberland landowner?
Right.
Have you set up some things that they can do to maybe help offset
Yep.
going forward?
Yeah, that's something, we've had a conversation, the Director Williams mentioned a meeting on Tuesday. We had a lot of folks from the industry, we had people from Georgia Forestry Association, Florida Forestry Association that was talking, and there was a list of things that could be done immediately, short term, intermediate term, and long term, as far as how can we address this situation. And there's quite a few things on that list that were discussed, and those things have actually been brought up in here, brought up today, as far as how can forestry receive a more favorable treatment moving forward. So those things are being discussed, and these events like this are a catalyst for those discussions to happen.
Well, I would think something like that on the state level, because at least at this point in time, most insurance is still based on the state level.
Mm-hmm.
That if GFC would back it and get behind it,
Okay.
Georgia itself could do something much quicker than trying to come up with a national approach.
Yeah, and there's state solutions being discussed as well, and that's one reason we wanted to have the meeting. If you notice on the agenda, there is an opportunity for feedback, which I'm thankful that Director Williams opened it up sooner so we can have the discussions as we go. But that was one of the meetings, purposes of the meetings was to get that feedback so that we could look at solutions, maybe even at a state level. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Excuse me, is there a lot of, you can have like an organization. Is there an organization for timber owners or timber foresters already in existence so we can have lobbying power? And lobbying power usually, that's what got the ag guys going.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
and I know that.
You sort of teed that one up for me, because I was going to clarify that as a state agency, we're a service organization. We cannot lobby. We do not lobby. We're there to support the state, to support the legislature. If they're looking at issues, we're there to provide information. To answer your question, yes, in Georgia, there's the Georgia Forestry Association,
Okay.
what I refer to as Georgia's Chamber of Commerce for Forestry, based in Forsyth, Georgia. And I'm hoping probably a lot of you are already members of GFA, because that is their role. It's advocacy at the state and the federal level. And in times like these, GFA and other state associations are going to be critical. There is a federal group, the Forest Landowners Association, FLA. It happens to be based in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, but it is a national scope organization. Their focus is particularly advocacy, lobbying, if you want to use that term. So yes, those organizations are out there, and even though it may be a little late here, if you're not a member of those as a state employee, I might get in trouble. But I would say if you're a timberland owner and you're not a member of those organizations, I would just suggest that you strongly consider it, because they will be at the forefront. They are already at the forefront of the discussions that are taking place both in Atlanta in advance of this upcoming special legislative session and the discussions that Congressman Bishop and his cohorts will be having in D.C.
So the lobbyists are already in place.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The forestry.
And if we join this, we can follow exactly what they're doing for us to see if our money is being used the way we want it to be used.
No question about it. They both have websites that is sort of the primary way that they communicate with their membership base. They have publications, and again, that really is the way that individual landowners can have a voice in the process.
Are y'all allowed to tell everybody you meet with about these so we can learn about it? Because I wasn't aware of it.
From an education standpoint, again, as a state agency, we don't lobby, but and we're going to talk. Devin actually is queued up here to talk a little more about markets. In particular, we tend to not get involved in what mills are paying for timber and whatnot. We view that as a free market process, if you will. But sort of the little slogan we use is healthy markets equal healthy forest. And we realize that for most of us, we're not wealthy enough to have land as a luxury. It's got to pay its way. And from that standpoint, healthy markets equal healthy forest is sort of our tagline from that standpoint. And again, I'm going to say, as Devin gets ready to talk about markets, we know that in times like these, that markets and timber prices are a sensitive subject. That really is not the reason we're here today. Even in times like we find ourselves in now, the decision for you as a landowner of whether to sell your timber, whether it's decimated, whether it's damaged, whether you dodge the bullet, is between you and your family, if the family is involved, and the folks that buy wood. So just sort of as an upfront, we will not go there. We will talk about markets and sort of the dynamics, but we will not get into issues such as prices and what have prices done since the storm and that type thing. So we just ask y'all to understand our position there and be with us on that. Devin, you ready? Yep. Okay. Devin Dartnell.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Chuck said about the young lady teeing him up, he just teed me up, talking about markets. Our limiting factor is markets, not supply of wood, and certainly not the capacity of the mills within this area. Our bottleneck is having markets to sell that wood to. Lumber markets, plywood markets, pulp markets, that's our limiting factor. Within 75 miles of Bainbridge, we've got 30 medium to large forest products mills. 20 of those are in Georgia, 8 of them in Florida, and 2 in Alabama, if you drew a 75-mile circle around Bainbridge. In an average year, the 20 mills in Georgia consume 8 million tons of wood. 8 million tons as they go across the scales going into the mill. The additional 10 in Florida, I don't have the numbers for, but based upon the type of mill, and it's 1/3, you could assume it's another 4 million tons. So 12 million tons of wood are consumed annually within a 75-mile radius of Bainbridge. Somebody on the left side here mentioned a while back about absorption rate. Well, that's what the conventional absorption rate for this area is. And it's based on the market. The mills can produce more. To the best of my knowledge, only 3 of those mills are operating at full capacity, where they're running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The rest are running 1 long shift or 2 shifts, and they're not at capacity. So the mills can produce more wood, they can buy more wood, they just don't have any place to sell that wood. So that's kind of the big picture on markets. If you recall, when Scott presented the timber damage assessment early on, he said there were 18 million tons of damaged wood in Georgia from this storm. And I just told you there's 12 million tons of absorption in a year. Dr. Dickens told us we had about 6 months. So the fact is, we probably won't salvage more than 20 or 25% of this wood. And that's only if everybody cooperates. If the logging force focuses on curtailing conventional operations of healthy trees and focuses on salvage operations, and if the mills will support the effort by buying, salvage wood as much as they can versus conventional wood, and we really all pull together in the same direction to salvage as much of this damaged timber as we can. We're very fortunate here that we have 3 very large pulp mills within about a 75 to 80 mile radius that can really consume a tremendous amount of wood during these times. Another comment was made earlier about sending the wood further, and we had a good meeting on Tuesday with a number of different people, called the railroad, really looking at ways out of the box to try to move wood to different markets. And we continue to work on that. We don't have a silver bullet yet, but that is one possible alternative that would help, is if we could send some of this wood to markets that were further away. And the answer is probably going to be limited to rail and using a port to ship it away. Trucking wood more than about 75 miles is cost prohibitive. And there's a lot of people in this room who know log truck rates are about 13 cents a ton mile. And a typical log truck is carrying 25 to 30 tons. So you're talking about $3.50 cost every mile that truck rolls. So if they have to go over 75 miles, it's coming right out of the stumpage price. And that's the landowner's, that's where the landowner's net is. Those are the high notes on the big picture of absorption rate, what this area has been growing, how much wood's on the ground, and that's what I was here to talk about. Chuck mentioned we're not going to be talking about pricing, and I agree. I think that's not our role by any means, and wouldn't be productive in this meeting. On one last note, I'll mention to you, one of the responsibilities of the Forestry Commission is, should there be any sort of timber theft suspicion, we are the responsible agency for investigating that. So if you find yourself in a position, not that you didn't get paid what you thought it was worth, but if you got paid anything different than what the contract you had in hand stated, you should contact us. And that being said, I'll open it up to any questions you may have about markets. Yes, sir.
What's your opinion of how long it will take for this overloaded market to work through? We have a moment to sell, a year?
Well, I've done a good deal of reading of papers that Dr. Dickens probably wrote back after Hugo, and I'd say the salvaged wood, if the mills will invest in wet storage, additional wet storage to keep them under sprinklers, there'll be wood salvaged from this storm that'll still be being processed 1 year from now. So I think that 1 year mark, it's certainly going to make an impact for a year, yes. And in some cases, this was mentioned earlier, but there will be prolonged effects of, you may not be able to get the seedlings you need 1 year from now because there's such a shortage, because the demand is so much more than we normally have. So there'll be effects that go on 2 and 3 and 4 years with respect to contractors to do your site preparation, tree planters who will come set those seedlings out for you, availability of seedlings. Those will be beyond a year. Yes, ma'am.
Is there anyone that is willing or able to go talk to the paper mills to encourage them about wet storage, about, looking for the salvage instead of the new timber? Because that's not really their thing, and
we've actually,
being close to them doesn't matter. They don't give you a price break. They're out for number one, as everybody is.
We met with many of the representatives of these 30 mills I just mentioned 2 days ago. And when I say we, it was Florida Forestry Service, Georgia Forestry Commission, Florida and Georgia Forestry Associations, Dr. Dickens, and Dr. Benton from UGA. And it was just a productive discussion about what worked after past storms, what didn't work, what could you try. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's not forget what we learned. So a lot of productive discussions went on a couple of days ago, and then it's, contact information shared. That I've been called multiple times in the last 2 days by some of the people who were at the meetings. But at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to go invest, and fortunately, it's not a big investment to add some sprinkler capacity. So some of those things are going to happen, I assure you.
So they're willing to talk or listen.
Yeah, and it's not, from my perspective, they understand that if you don't plant your land back in trees, they won't have trees in 15 or 20 years. None of these mills that have survived are so short-sighted. They know that. And even in that meeting, there were examples of last year's storm that went through East Georgia, where some mills could have gotten wood for free. And they didn't take it. They kept on paying their loggers because they wanted to make sure their loggers were going to be there for them now. Any other questions for me?
Again, obviously a sensitive subject, a critical subject for you because it goes straight to the bottom line. The conversations that I've had and we've had with the wood users in Georgia, and I think I can say the same thing has happened in Florida with our counterparts at the Florida Forestry Service and the mills down there, is if you look at the investment that the mill community, the wood processing community has, they're obviously in this business for the long haul. And like any other business, they have established working relationships, in some cases close working relationships, with their supply chain, whether that's wood dealers, whether that's loggers or whatnot. So it doesn't surprise me that in times like we're in now, those mills are going to first look to their normal supply chain and say, number one, can you keep wood coming in the gate of the mill? And number two, how can we help you sustain your business and your landowner's business, whether you're a consultant or a wood buyer or logger, so that this